Ladies and gentlemen, today I would like to tell you about the tragic legacies of the European imperialism and its terrible consequences. Due to the legacies of the European imperialism, the 21st century will see unprecedented expansion in the varieties of organized violence. To ignore the 21st century realities, then we and our children will be paying the prices for it in the coming centuries as we have been paying till now. The international community is living in a fantasy world without real threats and consequences. As a result, the innocent people will be dying for the mistakes the international community is going to commit. The struggles and the wars in which the world is engaged are bloody manifestations of a deformed world struggling to its normal condition. The world has to preserve arbitrary boundaries designed by the European tyrants. After deforming the world for 500 years, European imperialism has damaged the world a lot. Much of the developing countries suffer under the legacy of the Europeans' retreat, who left behind the prevalence of the arbitrary borders designed by the Europeans for the benefits of Europeans. From West Africa through the Middle East to South Asia, Europeans divided the world among themselves with little regard for geography and less for local identities. Now, the international community has entered a series of conflicts whose common cause is arbitrary dysfunctional borders, phony statehood, or both. One of these arbitrary dysfunctional lines is the line of hatred and evil, the Durand line between Afghanistan and Pakistan, which is also the legacy of the British imperialism in South Asia. But as the Durand line is the tragedy of the history, so I want to explain it by historical point of view. Ladies and gentlemen, in the 19th century, British held the Indian subcontinent, while the Russians held the lands of the Central Asia. But their spheres of influence overlapped in Afghanistan. So the British thought they might create a buffer state, Afghanistan. So in 1839, they invaded Afghanistan. They put a puppet king on the throne. They could not leave because the puppet king was unable to look after himself. In the end, the troops left and 16,500 British army got slaughtered. By the 1840s, the Russians had reached the Aral Sea and were slowly being drawn into Central Asia. Then in 1849, the British invaded and occupied the Afghanistan territory now called Pakhtunkhwa. As a result, the British Empire well entrenched in the backyard of Afghanistan. But the tribes saw no reason to stop their traditional raids just because the territory was now British. So the British were faced with the problem of how to control the tribes. The British tried first the closed border policy, which held as a principle that British sovereignty should not be extended to areas which could not be governed effectively. But this did not work very well. Then they started to try the forward policy, which involved capturing and holding areas in the tribal zone in the hills. Strong points were captured, fortified, garrisoned, connected by roads which would be protected. But this forward policy inevitably raised the question of where the border between British India and Afghanistan should be set. At the same time, fears were growing about the advance of the Russian Empire. By the 1870s, the Russians had been able to capture the great Central Asian cities of Bukhara, Samarkand, and Khiva. Therefore, in 1878, the British invaded Afghanistan again. But they failed, not because of the Russians, but because of Afghan resistance. After having defeated the British, the Afghans showed them the way back on which they had invaded Afghanistan. That's why the British found that in the battlefield it was impossible to conquer Afghanistan. So they started thinking how to use their famous formula divide and rule. And according to an American writer, Arnold Fletcher, Afghanistan had been encircled by the British at that time. So by 1893, the British had concluded that formal border needed to be established between Afghanistan and British India so that the Russian advance could be held off from the British Empire in India. Afghanistan was considered by the British as an independent princely state at that time, although the British controlled its foreign affairs and diplomatic relations. In the meanwhile, the then Viceroy of British India, Landowns, informed the King of Afghanistan, Amir Abdurrahman Khan, to receive the delegation to discuss the issue of the border between the Afghanistan and British India. Amir Abdurrahman Khan got annoyed and refused to receive the delegation. But then the Viceroy gave him ultimatum that if he would not sign the agreement about the border, he will be invaded. Unfortunately, the king was not strong enough to face this threat. So Henry Mortimer Durand traveled to Afghanistan in October 1893, and it could not have been the most pleasant of missions to conduct because two of the envoys who had been sent to Afghanistan in the 19th century, Sir Alexander Burnes and Sir Louis Cavalieri, had been cut to small pieces in very unpleasant circumstances. Ladies and gentlemen, after having arrived to Kabul, Sir Mortimer Durand presented a signed document with King Abdurrahman Khan in 1893, which referred to the border between Afghanistan and British India. On 12th November 1893, King of Afghanistan Amir Abdurrahman Khan and Britain's Foreign Secretary for India, Sir Mortimer Durand, drew a line on the paper across the roof of the world and signed it. However, in many cases, it was not clear where the boundary ran. There were areas represented on the map which did not even exist on the ground. This line is about 1600 miles long. So, with their might, power and force, the British imposed the Durand Line at the King of Afghanistan to divide the Pashtuns and weaken their power. The Durand Line divides ethnic Pashtuns as well as the Baloch, but the majority of the area in which the Durand Line runs has been inhabited by the indigenous Pashtuns. The Durand Line was demarcated to define their respective sphere of influence and limit interference in one another's affairs. It is worth noting that there are two parties mentioned in the agreement. One is the British government or the government of India, and the other is Amir Abdurrahman Khan personally and not the government of Afghanistan. So it was the personal act of the king. And this is the proof that the Durand Line agreement was signed on 12th November 1893, but on 13 November 1893, the Amir held a public darbar of his close circle in the Salam Khana Hall and informed them about the agreement which was already signed. The single-page Durand Line agreement contains 7 short articles. The Durand Line has always been a porous, dysfunctional, imaginary border since 1893. Till 1897, the agreement was kept secret from the people of Afghanistan. And when, in 1897, the Pashtuns knew about the agreement during demarcation, there was a massive uprising. But by the British Royal Air Force bombardment and 60,000 well-equipped British army, the uprising was suppressed. Though Amir Abdurrahman Khan allowed the setting up of Afghan and British Commission to demarcate the Durand Line, but he did not provide any security from the frontier tribes. In fact, certain scholarly investigations claim that the Amir's endeavors and machinations catalyzed the famous uprising of 1897. Ladies and gentlemen, the Durand Line triggered a long-running controversy between the governments of Afghanistan and British India, and it continues till to date. The status of the Durand Line remained unclear. The British viewed their negotiations with the Afghans as an internal colonial issue rather than as an international one. There are houses on the Durand Line even now. The one door opens into Afghanistan and other into Pakistan. What an irony it is. From a geopolitical and geostrategic perspective, it has been described as one of the most dangerous borders in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, this was the historical background of the Durand Line. Now, I want to tell you about the legal status of this line, whether it is legal or illegal. There are some serious errors in the Durand Line Agreement. The Durand Line Agreement document was in English, and Amir Abdur Rahman Khan did not understand the English language. Therefore, it leads the suspicious nature of forgery and or false documentation. The Dari or Pashto translation of this agreement has never been signed by Amir Abdur Rahman Khan. It suggests that he nullified this agreement even at that time. The total length of the boundary, which had been delimited and demarcated between March 1894 and May 1896, amounted to only 800 miles. James W. Spain also notes that the Durand Line Agreement, since it was signed, has been the source of dissension between Afghanistan and British India. British writer Fraser Tatler says that Durand Line has many defects and few advantages, and it is illogical from point of view of ethnography, strategy, and geography. Louis Dupre, another scholar, said it was a classic example of an artificial political boundary cutting through a cultural area because it cuts tribes and tribal groups in half. By long established political, economic, and cultural connections amongst the various regional Pashtuns populations, the Afghans viewed their division by the Durand Line as illegitimate. The Durand Line Agreement of 1893 divides boundary between three countries, namely Afghanistan, Balochistan, and British India. According to international law, all affected parties are required to agree to any changes in demarcating their common borders. In reality, the Durand Line Agreement was a trilateral agreement, and it legally required the participation and signatures of all three countries. But the agreement was drawn as a bilateral agreement between the Afghanistan and British India only, and the British intentionally excluded Balochistan. Hence, under the rules of demarcating boundaries of the international law, the agreement was in error, and thus it was null and void as soon as it was signed. The British ruled parts of Afghanistan without any legal authority, but through treacherous use of a piece of paper, the Durand Line Agreement, which did not have any legal standing in any court of law. As long as the British kept Afghanistan and Balochistan in the dark and apart from each other to discuss the agreement, the British could continue to rule Afghan territory. But in 1947, the British Indian government was dissolved, and hence there was no reason for the British to continue this drama anymore. On August 11, 1947, the British acceded control of Balochistan to the ruler of Balochistan, His Highness Mir Ahmad Yar Khan, the Khan of Kalat. The Khan immediately declared the independence of Balochistan, and Muhammad Ali Jinnah signed the proclamation of Balochistan sovereignty under the Khan. The New York Times reported on 12 August 1947 that under the agreement, Pakistan recognizes Kalat as an independent sovereign state with a status different from that of the Indian states. The next day, the New York Times even printed a map of the world showing Balochistan as a fully independent country. After Pakistan's independence, Muhammad Ali Jinnah and his legal team immediately found that the Durand Line Agreement was not a legal, admissible and binding document. To continue the illegal occupation of the territory belonging to Afghanistan, it was important for Pakistan to keep the flaw in the agreement a secret. But the dilemma was that Balochistan was an independent country, and one day the truth might be revealed to Afghanistan about the agreement. This truth could result in Pakistan losing its Pushtun-dominated areas to Afghanistan. So it was very important for Pakistan to either annex or invade Balochistan to continue with their legal occupation of Afghan territories. Jinnah tried to persuade the Khan of Kalat to join Pakistan, but the Khan and both houses of the Kalat assembly refused. The Pakistani government took an aggressive stance against Balochistan, and in March 1948, the Pakistani armed forces started their operation against the Balochistan government. They invaded Balochistan on 15 August 1948 and imprisoned all members of the Kalat assembly and merged Balochistan with Pakistan. This simple act of aggression against a sovereign nation assured Pakistan that their secret about the Durand Line agreement would remain intact. Ladies and gentlemen, throughout the period of British rule of India, the British never occupied Balochistan. There were treaties and lease agreements between the two sovereign states, but neither state invaded the other. Although the treaties signed between British India and Balochistan provided many concessions to the British, but none of the treaties permitted the British to demark the boundaries of Balochistan without the consent of the Baloch rulers. Ladies and gentlemen, the controversy over the Durand Line, however, got renewed after the death of Amir Abdurrahman Khan on 1st October 1901. His son Amir Habibullah Khan became the king of Afghanistan. The British refused to pay Amir Habibullah Khan the subsidy which was paid to Amir Abdurrahman Khan. They asserted that the deal was fixed between the government of India and the Amir Abdurrahman Khan was thoroughly a personal one. It had nothing to do with the government of Afghanistan. However, to that, Amir Habibullah Khan questioned, if the deal was personal, then would it mean that the Durand Line agreement stands invalid? The British, of course, could not agree, and finally, on 21st March 1905, a new agreement was signed by both the sides. Amir Habibullah Khan demanded for some more territories. The request from Lord Curzon for the demarcation of parts of the boundary line was not accepted, and thus the issues concerning the Durand Line then remained unresolved. However, it was also the time that the British still controlled Afghan foreign affairs. After the death of Habibullah Khan, his son Amir Amanullah Khan became the king of Afghanistan. He declared Afghanistan an entirely free, autonomous and independent state, both internally and externally. He also raised the pending issue of Durand Line with the British. The British Indian government, however, pursued this declaration as an offensive. This resulted in the Third Anglo-Afghan War. Afghanistan's purpose of the war was not only to take control over its own foreign policy, but also to re-establish Afghanistan's former borders with India. The war ended after the ceasefire of 3rd June 1919. The resultant Treaty of Peace was signed on 8 August 1919 at Rawalpindi. The Treaty of Peace concluded some critical points of major implication for Afghanistan. However, the most important one of them was the letter attached as an annexure to the Treaty of Peace 1919, which clearly stated that the said treaty and this letter leave Afghanistan officially free and independent in its internal and external affairs. Moreover, this war has cancelled all previous treaties. Thus, with the conclusion of the Third Anglo-Afghan War and the signing of the Anglo-Afghan Treaty of Rawalpindi to restore peace, all previous treaties and agreements got cancelled. Ladies and gentlemen, by 1920, Amir Amanullah Khan started developing close ties with Russia, which the British could no longer afford. To avoid any such development of relations between Afghanistan and Russia, the British in 1921 were forced to conclude a treaty which was far away from a formal treaty of peace and friendship. After 11 months long negotiation, the Treaty of Kabul was signed on 22nd November 1921 by Henry R.C. Dobbs, the Indian Foreign Secretary, and Mahmud Tarzi, Chief of Afghan Delegation. During the first session, from January 20 to April 9, 1921, the Afghan Amir Amanullah Khan demanded territorial concessions based on Afghans' right to self-determination in the northwest provinces of India, but he was not succeeded. The Treaty of Kabul could not resolve all the pending territorial and diplomatic disputes between the two nations. It also did not resolve most of the pending anomalies in respect of the Durand line that were left for the future discussion under the 1919 Treaty of Peace. The Kabul Treaty was agreed by both parties thus to be a temporary arrangement. According to the Article number 14 of the Treaty of 1921, the provisions of this treaty shall come into force from the date of its signing and shall remain in force for 3 years from that date. In this treaty, any one of the two parties was given the authority to denounce the treaty by giving 12 months notice before the expiration of the said 3 years. For a lack of an alternative, the treaty remained in force until after India gained independence in 1947, and the issue even remains alive from 1947 till to date. Afghanistan challenged the Durand line when the partition plan of Indo-Pakistan was announced on June 3, 1947. Afghanistan also claimed over their own territories that lay between the Durand line and the Indus River. So far as the legal status of the Durand line is concerned, Afghanistan put forward 3 major arguments which questions the legal status of the Durand line agreement. Afghanistan argument number 1. Pakistan is not the legal successor of British India because Pakistan was a new state carved out of the British Dominion of India. During a meeting with the British Secretary of Foreign Affairs on 31st July 1947, Afghan Prime Minister Shah Mahmud Khan declared that all agreements in respect of the Indo-Afghan border had been concluded with British Indian authorities, and therefore all of them would be null and void after the British India ceased to exist and power will be handed over to the new state of Pakistan. This official viewpoint of the government of Afghanistan was announced before Pakistan officially became independent. But after independence, Pakistan's response to this question was that by the International Court of Justice, Pakistan has the legal right to inherit all the treaties of the British Empire with Afghanistan. So, Pakistan is legally the rightful successor of the British rule of all its binding bilateral agreements. But here the question arises whether Durand Line Agreement was binding bilateral agreement defining a sovereign border or not. This I will tell you a bit later. There is also a need to distinguish between the Durand Line Agreement of 1893 and the subsequent treaties of 1919 and 1921. Afghanistan argument number 2. Pakistan violated the Durand Line Agreement in 1949. After a Pakistan Air Force plane bombed a village in Afghanistan, the Afghan government convened a Loya Jirga Grand Council, and it was declared that it recognized neither the imaginary Durand Line nor any similar line, and that all agreements from the 1893 Durand Line Agreement onward pertaining to this issue were void. According to the Afghan government, Pakistan had violated the term of the Article number 2 of the Durand Line Agreement, that no side will exercise interference on the other side of the line. The Loya Jirga also declared that from Durand Line to the Indus River, all the Pashtuns territory belongs to Afghanistan. Pakistan, on the other hand, again highlighting the international law that Afghanistan in any case could not unilaterally repudiate an executed binding agreement. However, this Pakistani counter-argument again rests on the presumption that the Durand Line Agreement and the subsequent treaties were binding in nature. However, none of these treaties concerning the Durand Line were binding in nature. Afghanistan argument number 3. The Durand Line Agreement expired after 100 years in 1993. Most prominent scholars like Dr. Mashal Khan Takkar argue that the Durand Line Agreement signed in 1893 expired after 100 years of being in force. Their claim is based upon the narration that after signing the Durand Line Agreement was manipulated by the British and that certain terms and clauses were removed, one of which was the clause of expiration of the agreement. They argue that the translated version of the Durand Line Agreement given to the Amir was different from the one which the British declared later. Drawing similarities to the case of Hong Kong and its transfer to China, it has been argued that the Durand Line Agreement too was signed under such terms. This claim received further spark from the governor of the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Khalilur Rahman, in 2005, saying to journalists that in 1993 the Durand Line Agreement had expired after 100 years, and that he had already spoken with the President General Pervez Musharraf to request an arrangement for its renewal. A renowned journalist Rahimullah Yusufzai said in 2005, Pakistani governor says, Durand Line Agreement expired in 1993. Shujat Ali Khawar, publishing in the newspaper, says on oath that ex-Interior Minister, late General Nasirullah Khan Babar, said to him that he was invited by Zulfikar Ali Bhutto when he was the Prime Minister of Pakistan and told him that 1993 is around the corner and the Durand Line Agreement will be going to expire and Afghanistan will demand for its territory. Therefore, Afghanistan must be burnt. Nasirullah Babar then said that by the help of Afghan religious group, we burned Afghanistan to such an extent that former Soviet Union also burned in it. But Pakistani line of argument since 1947 mainly rests on the presumption that the 1893 Durand Line Agreement was a binding bilateral treaty defining a clear international border. Pakistan also refers to the treaties of 1905, 1919 and 1921, stressing that the Afghanistan had also recognized the Durand Line in those treaties. However, this argument further weakens Pakistan's position. Ladies and gentlemen, now let me tell you about the 5 major flaws of Pakistan's legal claims and arguments. Flaw number 1. Firstly, the Durand Line Agreement, signed in 1893, simply laid down a political line separating respective spheres of influence and not a physical line to define two sovereigns. More so, from the British perspective, the line intended mainly to restrict the king's political influence over the tribal areas adjacent to the British India. The British did not ever control these free tribal areas. It is critical to understand and thereby distinguish between the meaning of line, separating sphere of influence, and that of a sovereign boundary. Now let us find out how sphere of influence differs from sovereignty. Professor Giovanni Di Stefano of the Public International Law at the University of Geneva, Switzerland, captures the meaning of sphere of influence based on international laws. Sphere of influence are usually established by international treaties, the object and purpose of which is solely the partition amongst the parties of those territories which have not yet been occupied or even explored. Thus, in the case of spheres of influence, there is no transfer of sovereignty or of the right to exercise it. The contracting parties are not the holders of sovereign rights on those areas. Thus, considering only the Durand Line Agreement of 1893, which refers to the sphere of influence, the agreement by itself did not give the British the sovereign rights over the tribal territories which fell on the Indian side. Mortimer Durand, in an interview after returning back to India, said that the tribes on the Indian side are not to be considered as within British territory. They are simply under our influence in the technical sense. As he clearly said, that the Durand Line was intended to be a virtual boundary, which was supposed to define and separate the British spheres of influence from the rule of the King of Afghanistan. He further added that we, the British, just wanted to create a strong buffer as a strategy under the Great Game. In order to acquire sovereignty, the British needed to completely occupy all the regions peacefully that came under its side of the line. Even later, when the Northwest Frontier Province (NWFP) was established in 1901, the free tribal areas were kept under separate arrangements with the federal government, like the special laws under the Frontier Crimes Rule (FCR 1901). In simple words, these free tribes on the Indian side of the Durand Line were only kept away from the political influence of the King of Afghanistan. The British never enjoyed any sovereign rights over these territories. Therefore, the question of succession of state, specifically with respect to the Durand Line Agreement of 1893, which is not a binding bilateral agreement defining a sovereign boundary, but a colonial agreement defining line separating spheres of influence. So, it is not the case addressed by Vienna Convention on Succession of States in respect of treaties, and is therefore subject to objections under international laws. Flaw number 2. The second major flaw of the Pakistani argument, that the Durand Line was clearly defined international boundary in 1893 and that Afghanistan had merely confirmed it in 1905. But it is the problem of the 1893 Durand Line Agreement because it was a personal agreement signed between the King of Afghanistan, Amir Abdurrahman Khan, and the government of British India. This was in fact the position taken by the British when they sought further concessions from Amir Habibullah Khan and decided to withdraw the previously given annual subsidies, arms and ammunition to the late Amir Abdurrahman Khan. However, in response, Amir Habibullah Khan had questioned the validity of the Durand Line itself, as I have explained you already. It was this very reason that the British had to renegotiate the terms of the Durand Line Agreement with Amir Habibullah Khan in the new Anglo-Afghan Treaty of 1905. Thus, it would be correct to state that Durand Line Agreement of 1893 had to be revised in 1905 because it was a personal treaty. The British too had accepted it in 1905 when they agreed to renegotiate the terms with the King Habibullah Khan. Even the Treaty of 1905, signed between Amir Habibullah Khan and the government of British India, was questioned later by Habibullah Khan's son Amir Amanullah Khan in 1919. Amanullah Khan's argument was that the Afghanistan of 1905 was not an independent sovereign state and the British had firm control over the foreign affairs of Afghanistan, and that the Treaty of 1905 was signed by the government of India on the one hand and the King of Afghanistan on the other. The British recognized that Amanullah Khan had a valid argument and that they could no longer deny Afghanistan complete freedom. After a brief war between the British and the Afghan forces, Afghanistan was given complete freedom. As the ruler of a free and sovereign country, King Amanullah Khan brought the British onto the table to renegotiate the terms of the Durand Line Agreement, and as a result established an Indo-Afghan frontier which was territorially different from the 1893 Durand Line. Thus both the 1893 agreement and the 1905 treaty were personal in nature. The British had accepted it, and after giving Afghanistan complete independence, had agreed to sit again to discuss the Durand line, but only this time with the government of Afghanistan. So it was not a personal one as before. Flaw number 3. Another error and crucial one is the Pakistani assumption that the government of Afghanistan had merely recognized the Durand line in the treaties of 1919 and 1921. The subsequent treaties of 1919 and 1921, similar to the Treaty of 1905, did not just accept or recognize the original Durand line as proposed in the 1893 agreement. To the contrary, these treaties of 1919 and 1921 were concluded upon cancellation of all previous treaties made between British India and Kings of Afghanistan. They were in fact negotiated in an attempt to resolve the territorial disputes associated with the original Durand line, to remove the anomalies that still remained, and thus to readjust the original Durand line physically. It is this very reason why the original Durand line of 1893 is territorially different from the present Durand line. This difference is crucial, and it highlights that the Durand line is after all not a sacrosanct boundary which has remained as it is for more than 100 years. Flaw number 4. The Treaty of Kabul, signed on 22nd November 1921, is the last official treaty negotiated and signed between the two contracting parties concerning the Durand line or Indo-Afghan frontier as mentioned in the treaty, because in the treaty it has been mentioned Indo-Afghan frontier and not Durand line. The Treaty of Kabul was signed between the two governments and thus was not a personal treaty. However, the Treaty of Kabul, signed in 1921, included a clause which gave either of the high contracting parties the right to unilaterally denounce the treaty after giving 1 year's notice. The treaty again attempted to resolve the anomalies left over the Durand line or the Indo-Afghan frontier described in the Treaty of Peace signed in 1919. Article number 2 of the Treaty of Kabul further highlights the territorial adjustment that were made along the Indo-Afghan frontier in 1921. The two high contracting parties mutually accept the Indo-Afghan frontier as accepted by the Afghan government under Article 5 of the treaty concluded at Rawalpindi on the 8th August 1919. However, not all pending anomalies were resolved, and there remained yet more territorial disputes between the two governments along with the other diplomatic issues of conflict. That's why they had kept a provision under Article 14 of the treaty which had clarified that the treaty was only a temporary arrangement and that the provisions of this treaty shall come into force from the date of its signature and shall remain in force for 3 years from that date. This clause did not even require the side choosing any reason to annul the treaty, and the treaty contained no other provisions indicating that any part of it was intended to be permanent or dealing with the question of succession. The treaty was initially made for 3 years. Thereafter, the treaty remained valid until 12 months from the date when either of the high contracting parties from the two governments decided to denounce it. Lord Birkenhead, in a memorandum circulated in June 1925, assessed the same, when he mentioned that the treaty was made for 3 years in the first instance and is now subject to denunciation by either party with 12 months notice. Thus, the government of Afghanistan, as one of the contracting party of the Treaty of Kabul, signed on 22nd November 1921, has always had the legal right to denounce the Treaty of Kabul and thereby cancel the temporary arrangements made under it concerning the Indo-Afghan frontier, now Afghanistan-Pakistan frontier. Flaw number 5. While analyzing the Treaty of Kabul 1921, Pakistani scholars come up with another defense by referring to the fact that the government of Afghanistan, in exchange of notes and letters with the government of India and Britain in 1930, had accepted that the treaty was in full force and that it remained valid, and that they thereby have lost the right to denounce it, even though the provisions remain in the treaty. This point of defense is based on Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaty VCLT 1969. Thus, Pakistani scholars base this defense on Article 45A of VCLT. However, this line of defense is not proclaimed and accepted globally because it contains an obvious flaw. Article 4 on non-retroactivity of the present convention in the VCLT clearly states that the convention thus only applies to those countries which have signed and ratified the convention, and it applies to those treaties which have been signed after the ratification of the convention. But in the case of Treaty of Kabul, both contending parties, that is Afghanistan and Pakistan, have not yet ratified the convention, and thus the convention has not yet entered in force into these two nations. And the Kabul Treaty in question was signed in 1921, long before 1969, when the convention was open for signature. Therefore, Article 45A of the VCLT does not apply in the case of Treaty of Kabul. Thus, the Treaty of Kabul is subject to international laws independently, and therefore Afghanistan had never lost the legal right to denounce and repudiate the arrangements made under Treaty of Kabul as per Article 14 of the treaty. So, Pakistan's arguments are based only on presumptions, and now it is clear that all these presumptions are flawed. Ladies and gentlemen, after the formation of Pakistan in 1947, the process of diplomatic exchanges for the settlement of the yet pending territorial disputes along the Durand line was completely discontinued. There has been no formal agreement or ratification of the agreement or treaties pertaining to the Durand line between Islamabad and Kabul. And thus, when Afghanistan government reaffirmed the non-recognition of the Durand line and denounced all the treaties and agreements corresponding to its border with Pakistan, it had the full legal right to do so. The international community, including United States, the UK, China, and other international organizations, have backed the legal position of Pakistan, even without bothering to study the original agreements and treaties concerning the Durand line, which explain why Afghanistan and its government had all the legal right to not recognize the Durand line and cancel all the previously made agreements and arrangements concerning the frontier. Their lack of will to face the problem head-on today will only complicate the situation further in future. Today, having never received legal support from the international community, the government of Afghanistan justifies its decision to not recognize the Durand line based on the argument that it is not a matter of the government, but that of the people of Afghanistan, especially those living near the frontier. No one in Afghan regime in Kabul are monarchists, republicans, communists, Islamists, Democrats, and not even the Taliban regime that was widely seen as a proxy for Pakistan was willing to accept the Durand line as the nation's legitimate eastern border. Pakistan had tried to get Afghan warlords and Taliban to sign a renewal contract of the treaty, but thankfully they didn't fall for the treachery of Pakistan. Although London and Washington have long supported Pakistan's claim on the Durand line, but some Western scholars say the decision was motivated by the logic of mobilizing Pakistan's support in the Cold War. A report of the House of Commons Library published in June 2010 argues the legal status of the Durand line has never been definitively settled. It suggests there is much credibility to the Afghan claim that the Durand line was never meant to mark the separation of the territorial sovereignties of the British Raj in Afghanistan. The main reason Pakistan faced problems with the Kabul rulers right from its inception was Kabul's claim over the territories of Pakistan from the Durand line to the Indus River. Pakistan is holding Pashtun lands illegally. On 21st October 2012, United States Special Envoy Mark Grossman claimed that the Durand line has been recognized borderline between Afghanistan and Pakistan by the US government. Afghan Foreign Ministry in response said, "The status of the Durand line is a matter of historic importance for the Afghan people. The Afghan government therefore rejects and considers irrelevant any statement by anyone about the legal status of this line." Hafiz Abdul Qayyum, a senator from eastern Nuristan province, remarked, "The United States is neither a judge nor a prosecutor to settle the problem between Afghanistan and Pakistan." Deputy Chairman Muhammad Alam Izzatiyar, who chaired the session, said, "If the United States has any viable strategy for resolving the dispute, we welcome it. But we vehemently denounce Grossman's statement as meddling in our political affairs." Abdul Ghafoor Lewal, the head of Kabul's Center for Regional Studies of Afghanistan, says, "I think talking about such controversial issues will have negative consequences for relations between America and the people of Afghanistan." Aryan Yoon, a member of the Foreign Relations Committee of the Afghan Parliament, said, "I think it will benefit both countries if we desist from talking about such issues." Ladies and gentlemen, the issue of Durand line is considered to be the main controversial issue between Kabul and Islamabad. Pakistani establishment views Pashtun nationalism a great national security threat to the existence of Pakistan. That's why Pakistan establishment, both civil and military, never allows Pashtun's movement to flourish in Pakistan. But on the other hand, Afghan nationalists still see Peshawar, Afghans' old winter capital, which was stolen from them by the Sikh in 1834 with the help of British Empire. In order to sideline the Durand line issue, Islamabad brings all available resources into use to either suppress the issue directly, if not, then religious groups like Taliban's cooperation is sought to counter Pashtun nationalist parties in and outside of Pakistan. But Pashtun nationalists have always noted that Pashtun identity is rooted in traditions older than Islam. Due to their lack of national integration in Pakistan, the Pashtuns and Baloch have been long arguing that Balochistan and the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa are colonies of Pakistan rather than equal partners in a federal union. Pakistan's main concern about the Durand line is to marginalize Pashtun's influence in the political affairs of the country. And by giving a few senior military and bureaucratic jobs to a few Pashtuns from prominent families to make the Pakistani Pashtuns hostage. And in the case of Afghanistan, Punjab-dominated Pakistan Army, ISI and establishment would never start terrorizing Kabul government with the horror of Taliban and Haqqani network. India's closeness to Afghanistan is also doubling the fear of Pakistan, which needs to be carefully analyzed by Kabul government. The Afghan provinces of Badakhshan, Nuristan, Kunar, Nangarhar, Paktia, Khost, Paktika, Zabul, Kandahar, Helmand, and Nimroz are all adjacent to the so-called Pakistani borders, and ethnic Pashtuns populate the area along the border. Major border crossings between the two countries are in Turkham between Peshawar and Jalalabad and in Spin Buldak between Kandahar and Quetta. When Pakistan tried to establish a single unified administrative unit called One Unit of West Pakistan to balance East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, Afghanistan saw it as the tribal area being taken away from their partition influence. There were riots at the Pakistani embassy in Kabul and in Pakistani consulate in other cities. There were military cause-ups and mobilizations. There was no war, but diplomatic relations became frosty in the extreme. At that time, the British ambassador in Kabul, Sir Daniel Lascelles, was having anguished correspondence with London. He was concerned that the legal status of the Durand line was not particularly watertight, and thus Britain might not be able to support Pakistan if the matter came to an international tribunal. The British has always been calling the Durand line as a frontier. That's why they also named the adjacent province to it North-West Frontier. But there is a difference between an international border and a frontier. An international border marks a separation between two contiguous states, and a frontier is the portion of a territory that faces the border of another country. The historic Afghan position is that the formal boundary to this frontier has yet to be set, which is Indus River. Ladies and gentlemen, Pakistan, as the unnatural state, would lose its Baloch territory to free Balochistan and Pakhtunkhwa to Afghanistan. Even among the most conservative circle of the United States of America, the support for free Balochistan and Pakhtunkhwa is gaining ground due to the treacherous character of Pakistan. Dear friends, a strong, stable Afghanistan, bolstered by American military and diplomatic support and further strengthened by the alliance with India, could make Pakistan very uncomfortable. But now the time has come that India should take advantage of this historic opportunity to free both Balochistan and Pakhtunkhwa from Pakistan by giving total support to the Pashtun freedom fighters, Baloch freedom fighters, and to the Afghan government as Mrs. Gandhi has changed the map of Pakistan in 1971. By the way, India owes the Pashtuns in Pakistan to help them to get rid of Pakistan and annex their motherland Afghanistan, because we the Pakistani Pashtuns had helped the Indian freedom fighters when they were fighting for their independence from the British colony before 1947. Now it is the moral obligation and responsibility of the Indian government to help us in our freedom struggle to get rid of Pakistan and annex our motherland Afghanistan. The American Institute of Afghanistan introduced a lengthy report after its conference on Durand Line in July 2007 titled "No Afghan Government Ever Accepted the Durand Line as an International Border." This refusal has continued for more than a century under regimes of all political stripes, some of which called for its re-incorporation of the territory into Afghanistan. The Pashtuns in Pakistan never identify themselves as Pakistani. Rather, they introduce themselves as Afghans and their homeland as a part of Afghanistan. Historically, the Durand Line was disputed from the very day it was established. The Durand Line is a sensitive issue both in Afghanistan and Pakistan. In Afghanistan, nobody is ready to speak in favor of it. In Pakistan, anyone who speaks against the Durand Line is labeled as traitor. I, being a Pakistani Pashtun, never recognized the line of hatred and evil Durand Line as the legitimate line, and I send curse on this line. But on the other hand, it is a great honor for me to be labeled a traitor by Pakistan. I just love it. Pakistan has mainly used Islam and jihadists to destabilize Afghanistan and suppress the Durand Line issue. Interestingly, the decades-long war and chaos in Afghanistan has never discouraged the Pashtun nationalists in Pakistan to stop their campaign for reunification with Afghanistan. So, to understand the current conflict in the F-Pak region, it is necessary to understand the root cause of the problem, which is the territorial dispute between Afghanistan and Pakistan. The Pakistani establishment has this obsession that a stable and strong Afghanistan will enable it to raise the issue of the Durand Line. They are willing to support any group they can destabilize Afghanistan. To maintain its current territorial integrity, It is in the interest of Pakistan to have a weak and destabilized government in Afghanistan so that there is no one to challenge the authenticity of the Durand Line Agreement. Therefore, Pakistani intelligence agencies have provided shelter for members of Al-Qaeda, Haqqani Network and Taliban who are committing acts of terrorism within Afghanistan to destabilize the democratically elected government in Afghanistan. Unless the Durand Line issue is resolved, Pakistan will continue to destabilize Afghanistan by any means, no matter whoever rules the country. Pakistan may be unwilling and unable to cooperate with Afghanistan unless some of its illegal concerns are met. These include downsizing Indian presence, accommodating the Afghan Taliban in government, and the border question involving the Durand Line. And Pakistan is using the Haqqanis and Mullah Umar as a bargaining card for it. But here questions arise. Why Pakistan is dictating Afghanistan? The relationship between India and Afghanistan is deeply rooted in the history. Afghanistan is a sovereign country, and it is its right to keep relationship to any country it wants. When Pakistan says that the Taliban must be accommodated in the Afghan government, then why Pakistan is not accommodating in Pakistan government the Pakistani those Taliban who are fighting against Pakistan? And when Pakistan is pressurizing Afghanistan to recognize the Durand Line as international border, then why Pakistan is not recognizing the line of control LOC with India as an international border? But the mindset which Pakistan has inherited from the British Empire is still well entrenched in the mentality of Punjab-dominated Pakistan army, elites and establishment. The British also had been trying to dictate the Afghan rulers, and Pakistan continues the same. But now it is 2014 and the scenario will be different very soon. Pakistani military has always been using the religious card not only in Afghanistan but in Indian administered Kashmir and India too. Former Mujahideen from Afghanistan were sent to Kashmir to support the local rebellion against the assembly election in 1987. But the Islamist militants also turned against the supporters of the Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Front that demanded national independence and not accession to Pakistan. When Pakistan wanted to fence parts of the Durand Line in 2006, it was met with strong opposition from the Afghan side, which noted that the fence would only lead to dividing and separating the Pashtuns on both sides of the border. Pakistani authorities installed a biometric system at the Chaman border crossing Babi Dosti Friendship Gate in Balochistan in January 2007. They installed 8 computerized doors, 6 for pedestrians and 2 for vehicles. However, they too was also opposed by the Afghans to such an extent that on the second day of the installation, angry protesters attacked the border gate and destroyed throughout the system. Former President of Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai said, "No government in Afghanistan will accept the Durand Line. Our position is clear. We don't accept the Durand Line and we will not accept it. Whatever the British Empire imposed on Afghanistan, it was not acceptable in 1893 and it is not acceptable to us today." Anti-American sentiment is running white hot among the Pakistani public. Now Americans wondering why we support Pakistan. America and the allies have been given the sacrifices of the lives of their sons and daughters to defend a bygone British boundary Durand Line. But why? And for what? For Pakistan, which has been cheating and playing double-cross game with the United States of America and NATO. The time has come to ask where to draw the line. The claims of Afghanistan are crystal clear for their own territory from the Durand Line to the Indus River. Ladies and gentlemen, the international community is dealing with a paradox. Now, new methods and mechanisms can be carried out for solution to the matter of Durand Line. They should bring the issue to the international court or to arbitration of a neutral third party. However, one way or another, a definitive resolution is a must. Dear friends, United States is taking the side of Pakistan, whose government is seen as harboring and even aiding Taliban and Haqqani militants waging the insurgency in Afghanistan, who are sheltered in the territories cut off by the Durand line from Afghanistan. Pakistan has always been trying to install a client regime in Kabul. For this, they are ready to do any illegal and dangerous thing. Under the supervision of Pakistan Army and ISI, thousands of terrorists have crossed the Durand line from Pakistan over the last decades and killed large number of Afghans. Pakistan, like the British, never succeeded in establishing direct state administrative authority in the old tribal agencies, now renamed the Feudal Administered Tribal Areas FATA. Pakistan has been manipulating the situation in the tribal areas along with the Durand line to achieve a continued strategic relationship with the United States that provides it with military and financial assistance. If peace and stability were to be restored, the aid would end. Thus, continued trouble along the frontier generates a greater benefit to Pakistan than thus seeking accommodation with its neighbor. But in spite of all these calamities created by Pakistan to Afghanistan, even then Afghanistan today can be described as a strong nation but a weak state, while Pakistan is a strong state with no strong sense of nationhood. Afghanistan government is institutionally fragile, but this weakness is counterbalanced by a strong sense of national unity that has developed among its people over the centuries. Even during Afghan Civil War, the country never experienced the threat of partition because none of the factions saw this as a useful outcome. Each wanted a stronger position within the Afghan polity rather than independence from the Afghan state or amalgamation with co-ethnics in neighboring countries. Even in the absence of a state administration in Kabul, Afghans never feared that their country might disintegrate. By contrast, Pakistan never developed a secure national identity. It has been preoccupied throughout its history by fears of internal disintegration. Pakistan even couldn't survive for 24 years after independence, and East Pakistan became Bangladesh in 1971, whereas further disintegration is around the corner. To counteract such divisive forces, central governments in Pakistan have fallen on the powerful military and bureaucratic institutions inherited from the British to impose their will on the country's regions. Ladies and gentlemen, now United States and its allies are pulling back from Afghanistan, but the problem remains as before. After the United States and NATO withdraw from Afghanistan, the Pashtuns again will be in the crossfire, as Pakistan and Iran are preparing for their proxy wars on the Pashtuns' territories both in Afghanistan and Pakistan. The Durand Line ethnic division question has not yet formally reached the United Nations, which could play a major role in settling the dispute between Afghanistan and Pakistan. After the death of Osama bin Laden in Pakistan and the countless insurgent attacks in Afghanistan, United States military leaders said that terrorist safe havens in Pakistan must go, but no practical steps were taken by NATO and USA, and now they are withdrawing at the end of 2014. So they must think about the dirty role of Pakistan in Afghanistan, Kashmir, India, and in the peaceful, civilized world as a whole. God bless you all, my viewers.